All right, happy Friday, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the Modern Family Dynasty newsletter. It comes out on Fridays. We're going to do a quick recap of the newsletter. I get a lot of great feedback and comments on the newsletter. I've been putting it out for a couple of years now. I have, I think, up to 3,000, a little over 3,000 people that enjoy it every week and just provide have a lot of great questions, a lot of great feedback. So I'm going to share some of those questions as we go through this. Now, LinkedIn doesn't record these audio live events, but we do record it ourselves, and we are going to put it in the Wealth for Life LinkedIn group. So if you're not in that group, make sure you can just search the Wealth for Life LinkedIn group or go to my profile, and you'll find both links to the group and to this week's copy of the newsletter. So one of the topics we had this week, part of it was that the headline was, 70% of the time your kids will blow all the wealth that you leave them. 90% of the time it's all gone by the time the grandkids are adults. And there's some specific reasons why. And when they did some polls and some studying on this, 64% of people admit they had disclosed little to nothing about their wealth to their children, which is a pretty crazy statistic. And when you look at why does that happen? Well, when they polled people, 78% feel the next generation is not financially responsible enough to handle that inheritance. And I was sitting down with a client a couple of months back, and over 10 million net worth, and hadn't discussed any of that with his kids. He's like, my kids don't even know how much money that we have. And that's really not a good plan, because that's, that wealth can end up getting squandered away in family fights and everything else. And that's why it's not easy getting into the top 1%. And so when you get there, there are systems and structures that you can use to kind of set it up so that wealth can continue for generations. And so in this week's newsletter, one of the things we put is this little framework for how do you even have discussions about money. And it's good to start when the kids are young. There's a little graphic in there that talks about these 7 ways that you can have discussions, and that's teaching to borrow effectively, share thoughtfully, earn throughout your life, save well, spend wisely, invest as a wealth owner, and protect against risk. And those can just be some basic frameworks for money and in creating family values around that, because it really can be fun to create this kind of thriving family culture for you and your family. But a lot of that really starts with talking with your kids about success, about your success, not necessarily the money, but how did you create the success that you have? How did you share the process? Or you're sharing the process of how you did it. Talk business. And we know that kids are kids, and a lot of times they're not going to be interested. They're busy. They're playing video games. They're doing whatever they're doing. But you got to keep them talking, and because they are going to retain some of that. And so there's certainly structures that you can use, like we've covered in previous newsletters, where like we talked about private foundations. Private foundations are one of the best vehicles to kind of create your own modern family dynasty. Obviously, they're fantastic for tax deductions and tax benefits. You can cut your taxes by 30%. The money goes in there. It can be, it's going to grow tax-free. You can go do work for your foundation. So the idea around that is you're creating this family mission to help create generational success. And so you have a mission of what are the values, how do you want to contribute, how do you want to do good in the world. And I know a lot of people think about that as just donating to charity, but financial or private foundations have the difference of where you're becoming the charity and you're actually doing the work. Because I do think we need to get away from this idea that our contribution in society is just we send money off somewhere. We send it to the IRS, we pay our taxes, we think our civic duty is done. It's better off if we can teach people, our family, how to keep contributing and creating a mission around that. And a lot of times people say, hey, maybe my kids are all screwed up, they're not going to pick up the mission. You know what? But maybe the grandkids do it, and you never know. And so what you can do, because a lot of people are worried about, again, leaving this lump sum of money to their kids, is that they're going to blow it, it's going to screw them up, they don't deserve it, all these things. So instead, you create these foundations, let them go earn it. You want, hey, here's the family mission, here's what we're going to try and do, here's our benchmarks for success. They can come work for that mission, and it can continue out throughout your life, and it can be a lot of fun, and then continue for generations to come. And that, to me, is so important because, again, when you look at wealth gaps, and the wealth, I'm talking about top 10% to top 1%, it's a big difference from getting top 10% to top 1%. So if you've made it into the top 1% and you're trying to get there, it's a good idea to have your ability to stay there, if that makes sense. So one of my favorite quotes from John Quincy Adams, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And that's what you're trying to think about when you think about impact that you can make by creating your own modern family dynasty there. Now, some of the questions I get, and I had some great comments and questions from the post earlier, and some of them have to do with comments about how do you ensure, what are the ways creative ways that you have found to make these conversations engaging and impactful. And one of the other comments was, how do you make sure that endures and maintains? And I don't think there's any shortage for time in the game, meaning you have to put the time in like with your kids and help them experience it. So my kids are 8 and 12 years old. We just started on this crazy adventure of homeschooling. But part of the things we're going to do is I'm going to project them with, task them with starting a business, because my wife is very passionate about horses. We have, wild Mustangs. Wild Mustangs is a big thing. There's where we get them, there's a really cool program that the prisons do, where the prisoners actually take these wild Mustangs and they train them for a few years, and then they auction those out, and we go to the auction and we buy them from the prison. So it's a neat program, and my wife's very passionate about horses, and so I keep telling my kids, this is your task. We're going to start a business around the horses and her success that she does. So she's out working with them and training them and doing all that stuff. And we're going to do a little bit of the Gary V. They're going to learn how to video that and document all her experiences and share that content, build the Facebook, the Instagram pages, and eventually turn that into an e-commerce store where she starts, selling horse tack and horse supplies and all that stuff. Really neat niche, really doing a lot of fun stuff. But I'm going to task them with learning success and growing the business. So it's just those real world lessons that can make all of this stuff more impactful and more lasting. And so, because it's not just about leaving wealth, but it's about passing on the wisdom. And I think so people had asked, how do you get that? You'd have to again, create the environment to do it. Another thing you can do is, I think also about life cycle, where my kids are at. We're looking at starting some sports franchises, youth sports. Youth sports is a great business niche. So again, it's businesses that I could get them involved in. They could learn the processes and be able to continue and just building that culture over time. So let me check the other comments and questions and see if there was anything else on leaving wealth for generations. No, I think those are all those good starts. So the next area we covered in this week's newsletter was talking about the $32 trillion in federal debt, and should you really be worried about that? So 32 trillion in debt obviously is a big number, but it is important and it is a problem, but it's also important to look at it in context. So one of the other charts we had in there in this week's newsletter was the ability, hey, we are historically about where we were in the 80s and 90s when it comes as a percentage of interest payments on the debt to nominal GDP. So we're not historically crazy in that regard. It was manageable in the 80s and 90s, so it's okay, well, hopefully we can manage it today as well. But I think really more the bigger factor is that global public debt has reached colossal levels. Because a lot of people look at the U.S. and that 32 trillion debt number, and we're going to go, oh man, the U.S. is going to fold and we're going to implode and all the other stuff. $92 trillion in global debt, I believe, is the number. So all the countries in the world are on this big global debt system, not just us. And that's a big deal because many of these countries are a lot worse. And if you look at public debt in the developing world, it's growing at a lot faster for these developing countries. And so when you're combining that, okay, it's the whole world that is kind of on the take of this debt system. And then you look at the U.S. economy, we are still by far the strongest economy in the world. And those numbers, in the chart from this week's newsletter, we've had more GDP growth than any other country in as far as this last recovery since 2019. So the world has massive debt, and we still have the strongest economy. So I guess the way you would say it is we're still the cleanest dirty shirt in that laundry pile. And of course, it does also help that we own the reserve currency. And so we're able to certainly carry more debt. I think the bigger risk of our debt is just the ability of our political system to come together and manage things. And that political instability that we have of divisiveness and everything else makes it hard to really just kind of solve problems in a rational way. But overall, the American economy is still thriving. There's a lot of opportunity there. So it's just don't get over concerned with, the media is very doom and gloom, but there's still a lot of good things happening. So the next section of the newsletter this week, and actually let me check the comments because I think there was a couple more comments on the global debt landscape. Just make sure I answered those. One of the questions was related to believing that the U.S. has the strongest economy. Does that put us in a better situation to handle the debt? Yes, it does, and especially compared to every other country in the world, we're still in a much better position. A few of the smaller countries are doing really great. Obviously, Germany and Australia, they have AAA credit ratings and they have low debt to GDP numbers, but they're just not in scale and size compared to us. And I think that, yes, hopefully that historical perspective can help ease some of those concerns. And just knowing that, okay, we've been in similar positions before, we do have to fix it. I don't know, again, I'm not always I can't say that I'm that optimistic about our political situation in the country, but hopefully we can make strides on that. But again, business is still good, there's still opportunities, you should still be focused on, all the opportunities that we have. So the next thing we talked about, each week I do the 4 tips. So there's 4 sections in the newsletter. If I didn't say at the beginning, you have the learn section where we talk about topics, financial topics, charts. We go through a few charts. And there's the productivity tip for the week. 30-minute walks in nature for better health. That's the productivity tip of the week. So walking in nature boosts your mood, strengthens your immune system, reduces anxiety, inspires creativity and fun. Nature walks are a blast. We have a second home up here in the mountains outside of a couple hours west of Phoenix east of Phoenix and the Payson area. So we've been able to escape that 110-degree heat. And I've been getting up in the morning and sometimes in the evenings and just going for these beautiful 2-mile, 3-mile hikes in the forest. And it really has had an incredible impact on my productivity and creativity and all the things in there. So I definitely recommend, if you can get out, go walk in nature. There's nothing like it. Then our last one for the week is the concept section. That's usually where I'll just have an image there posting about a certain, give you a visual, a concept. This week it's taxed as you go versus tax-free. And it's a pretty crazy thing to think about, but if you take $1 and you double it 20 times, and you do that on a tax-free basis, that dollar will turn into $1 million over 20 periods. And if you tax it as earned every year at 25%, it's going to turn into $72,000. $1 million tax-free, $72,000 if it's in a taxable environment. And so the highlight there is to just highlight the fact that most people really underestimate how much taxes take an impact on their overall wealth. And I'm not necessarily thinking this in terms of an investment, but thinking about this in terms of your income. So it happens all the time where I'll talk to people and they're like, hey, I got a $100,000 bonus. I've been working really hard, and then all of a sudden they owed $42,000 in taxes on that bonus. And you think about that in this context of the dollar doubling and how many times you're taking wealth off. It's real easy. It can wipe out millions of dollars. And you think about it like this: if you have an extra, say it's $250,000 that you paid in taxes, maybe that's 1 year from a big company exit, or a big bonus, or maybe that's over 5 years. You're just paying an extra $50,000 a year. That $250,000. The question I always ask is, could you double that at least once? And could you have that $250,000 invested instead of paying in taxes? Invested, have it grow to $500K. Most people say, yeah, I could do that. And in your life, could you double it one more time? So could you double it from $500K to $1 million? Most people say, yeah. And on varying time frames, you're investing in businesses, that can happen quickly. If you're in the market, it could take longer. But the point is that $250,000 in taxes that you paid could have easily grown to $1 million in additional wealth for you. So taxes take a big chunk of wealth, and there's some great calculators out there you can look at. But when people get into this area of the top 10% to the top 1%, that's where tax rates start to go parabolic, because you're not quite wealthy enough to do the strategies that the top 1% are doing to eliminate taxes. So you're getting just pounded by the tax code. And now when you look it up, you'll see, depending on where you look, the top 1% is paying 25% in taxes. So, maybe, but then you forget about state taxes, Social Security taxes, Medicare taxes. When you start adding in those rates, it can easily be in the 35 to 40% range, as someone's getting into that $150,000 a year income range up to $1 million. And that's when you're trying to really build some wealth and save more, and the taxes keep beating you down. So that's why it's really, really important to learn to master the tax code and use it to your advantage. And let me check if there's any more comments. Yeah, I think one of the comments there was taxation can be complex, and understanding that implication of tax as you go versus tax-free is crucial. It absolutely is. If you had a 25 or 35 or 40% loss in your investments every year, you would definitely do something to fix it. And that's what's happening to a lot of people in the tax code. So it's definitely worth the time to fix it. So that's this week's recap of the Modern Family Dynasty. I will post this in the Wealth for Life group on LinkedIn, so make sure you're in that, and you can check out the recap. Thanks again for listening.